All right. Welcome to another episode of Millennial Money Matters with Kelly Turner.
And Derek Mazzarella.
And today we have a special guest, my friend, Hailey Rice. Hi, Hailey.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm a personal injury attorney with Goth Law Group. I've been practicing law for about 13 years. I live in West Hartford. I've lived in Connecticut most of my life, a couple hiatuses to Boston and San Diego.
Nice.
Dog lover. I've got a whole menagerie of pets at home these days. We just got a puppy last week.
Oh, my God.
How many pets do you have?
I have 3 dogs and a cat right now.
Oh, so you got a little zoo there.
And 2 children, so the chaos is real.
And one of her dogs is now going to be like TikTok famous because I've been watching him.
Trying really hard. That's my retirement plan.
Perfect.
Can't
He's
go
adorable.
wrong.
No. He's adorable. Well, thank you for joining us. I think from the Millennial Money Matters standpoint here, right, as we hear like personal injury law, and people think of one of two things. They think of billboards on the highway, and they think of late night TV commercials, right? Of like, what do these people actually do? And I think there's a lot of like myth around it, right? Like what is personal injury law? Why are you called ambulance chasers? Is that like a legitimate thing? Or is it just sort of a misinformed opinion that people have? So I think that's sort of like my first question is like, what does a personal injury attorney do?
There's so much to unpack there. And, I grew up in the days, in the 90s and the late 80s in Connecticut where there were certain firms that were all over the TV. And that was kind of the beginning of major legal marketing. I think the legal profession for a long time sort of had its nose in the air about marketing and can still, from time to time, even in the modern age. But I think most firms are recognizing that you have to get the word out there. Doing good work and word of mouth referrals aren't enough anymore, especially now when we are trying to reach consumers directly versus, networking with other attorneys as much. The internet is a really powerful tool. So getting out there and getting in front is really important. I'm fortunate enough to work at a firm that signs a lot of clients on a weekly basis. So I am constantly opening new cases, and I can't tell you 90% of the people that I talk to on a weekly basis say, oh my God, I've never done anything like this before. I'm so lost. So, I think there can be this stigma about personal injury law that there's a certain level of desperation to it. And it's something that's easy to kind of joke about until you need it. And then suddenly it's your life, it's your body. You're going through a really disruptive period in your life, and you need somebody to guide you through that. So a lot of times I feel like part legal professional and part therapist. People are, their car's ruined. They can't go to work. They have a million medical appointments. They have injuries. They're not even sure what they're dealing with. So part of it is educating people on what their rights are and what the law is. And part of it is just hearing them and talking to them about what they're going through and providing support and being a beacon for somebody to get through a very difficult period of their life.
Yeah, I think something that's interesting too, you sort of mentioned the marketing piece, I guess, of attorneys is, we find, I'm in real estate, obviously, and I work with real estate attorneys. 20 or 30 years ago, the legal divisions were far less than they are now, right? You had like a family attorney and they did your will, your divorce, your personal, they sort of did everything. And over time, we've really moved to this more like specialized law where it's not, the one attorney in your town who's like representing everybody for everything. And I think that's sort of like an important distinction because you guys like specialize in this. You know all of the laws associated with it. You sort of know how to move these cases through, where working with somebody who doesn't specialize in it, you may miss things.
Absolutely. And that's a topic I feel really passionate about. I mean, the generalist is a dying breed of lawyer. And the reasons behind that, I think, are largely shaped by internet marketing. Google AdWords, for example, back in its original iterations and, modern variants, are really interested in content that's highly specialized on websites. So in order to rank in social searches and things like that, you really have to show expertise in a certain area. And the influence that that's had on the legal profession has been really profound. But aside from that, occasionally, we talk to a lot of clients that have consulted with other lawyers and things like that. And if personal injury, for, all of the criticism that it gets, is a highly specialized area of law. There's a lot of nuances with insurance coverage. There's a lot of nuances with medical treatment and, what your rights are and what your case is worth. There's very sensitive timing issues if you have, certain types of cases on a municipal sidewalk or involving like a dram shop where someone was overserved. Notices have to go to very specific people within very specific timeframes. And if you're working with somebody that really has never handled that before and doesn't know what they're looking at, you can lose a lot of your ability to recover damages in a case like that.
So why don't you, do you want to walk us through kind of like, all right, let's say I get in a car accident, an icicle falls on my head at, a business. Like what's the first step you take?
The first step I always suggest is document. The biggest, problem that we can see in a case is if there's no evidence that it actually happened. Motor vehicle accidents tend to be a little bit more straightforward because the first thing people will do on the highway is call the police. But if it happens in a parking lot, for example, people don't always think to do that. So always call the police if you can. If you fall and get injured, getting an immediate contemporaneous photograph of that defect. Obviously, if you're too injured to really deal with that and you're being taken away by the ambulance, that's a different matter. But if there are other people there with you, or you can go back to the scene later, have a friend or family member go back, that's really important. Particularly, the winter's coming back up with snow and ice cases. If you're falling on ice or something like that, getting an image of what that space actually looked like or what the weather conditions were that day can be really important, and they can make the difference between a really strong case and a really difficult case. Secondly, call an attorney, even if you don't think it is a very significant matter. A lot of personal injury attorneys offer free consults and free case reviews. They can give you some advice as to how to deal with things, what you should be looking out for, and then ultimately it's your decision as to, what you want to do there. I guess I'll rest there and see what questions you have from that.
What do you have?
Well, after that, I would say, all right, so you have the consult with the attorney, and the attorney says, hey, this doesn't sound like a case. Do you go to 600 attorneys to double check, or do you?
I mean, there is a wide range of, different opinions on cases and what's a good case, what's a bad case, depending on what a firm might specialize in, or, how busy or not busy they are, what they prioritize. I know a lot of firms try to make referrals. Like if they can't handle it or they don't think it's a good fit for them, they'll say, hey, look, I know this other firm. But I always recommend at least getting a second opinion, because you never quite know, what you're dealing with. And if 2 or 3 lawyers say, yeah, I don't really think this is a good fit, then you have a picture. But
is it usually, is it usually dollar amounts, or is it usually like, hey, the specialty for us is like, hey, we typically deal with car accidents. We don't deal with falls.
Yeah. Most injury firms will deal with, slip and falls, car accidents, and dog bites across the board. That's kind of the core of it. Medical malpractice is a more specialized area. Not all firms will take that. But, as you're describing the situation, sometimes I'm going to use the example of backing out into the street, right? If you're backing out of your driveway and you get struck from behind, there's a potential liability issue there and a question of who might be at fault. Depending on how those facts are described, when you call in, one firm might be like, I don't really think that's going to be something we can do. But another firm might look at that and say, oh, yeah, absolutely. We believe this other person was liable. We can take the case. So if you have anything like that, I always recommend getting a couple opinions.
Gotcha.
What do you think is the number one mistake people do out of the gate when it comes to personal injury? Is it the not documenting? Is it talking to too many people? Is it posting on social media?
Without being too broad, I think it is, in general, having a little bit too much faith and trust in the system. And what I mean by that is by making the assumption that your word is going to be enough, and, kind of approaching the whole situation as if the insurance company's on your side. You're going to get a call right away, especially if it's a motor vehicle accident, with a police report. If the other driver called their insurance company, their goal is to contact you as soon as possible and try to resolve the claim. A lot of times you might still be in the hospital. You might be dealing with your initial injuries when you get that first call. You don't really even know what you're looking at yet. And there's intention there to contact you before you get an attorney to kind of advise you as to what you would do. So occasionally I see some clients, get into a little bit of confusion or trouble with that because they've just sort of assumed that the insurance company is there to help you. The insurance company is there to protect themselves and to protect their insured. So it's a little bit of a contentious relationship. So my advice to everyone is if the insurance company calls you up and wants a written statement or wants to start talking about it and you're not really sure what you want to do in terms of legal representation, you're under no obligation to call them back right away or have that initial phone call. You can tell them, hey, I need a day or two to get it together. I'm thinking about getting a lawyer, anything like that. And just buy yourself a little bit of time and think about it before you provide too much information or, paint yourself into a corner with agreeing to a settlement.
Yeah, because that offer's not just going to immediately go away or disappear, right? And there's
right. They have time with that. And, sometimes I've seen insurance companies put a lot of pressure on, hey, we've got to get this resolved by the 16th day. And they sort of invent false deadlines sometimes to get that pressure on to make a decision. And there's really, there's statutes of limitations that are applicable to every case. But there's really nothing that you have to take care of in under a year in terms of the core personal injury cases. So you've got time to figure out what you want to do.
You don't have weeks. So with that in mind, though, so it's typically is the other person's insurance carrier the ones reaching out to you, or are they usually doing it through your insurance?
It depends a little bit on the circumstances of the case. Generally, the most traditional flow is, you'll get in a car accident. The other driver, the at-fault driver, will go back and they will put their insurance company on notice. Hey, I rear-ended a guy on 84 this morning. Here's the information that I have from the police report or the accident summary. And then the insurance company will usually go to town with, picking up the phone and calling. Sometimes, the non-fault driver will also contact their insurance company just to let them know. You can resolve the damage to your car through your own insurance, and then they will seek reimbursement from the other at-fault driver's company. Yep. So sometimes, you'll find yourself reaching out and putting your insurance company on notice as well. And again, while they're there to protect you, they also have their own interests in getting things resolved, as smoothly and minimally as possible. So another assumption that people make is, well, this is my insurance company. This is a safe conversation. I would take all of that with a grain of salt and definitely consult a lawyer before giving any kind of recorded statement or anything to your own insurance company too.
Gotcha. So I guess while we're on the topic of the insurance part of it, so I don't know if it makes sense for us to go with what like limits are on a policy, and then when it comes to like bringing an attorney in, the bodily injury, do you guys always go up to the limits? Is it like, hey, we know going into this case that this person that hit us has low limits?
It's definitely a factor, and it's usually something that we don't find out immediately in the beginning of the case, but usually within the first 30 days we're able to do that. The minimum insurance policy limits for motor vehicle in the state of Connecticut is $25,000 per person and $50,000 per incident.
Which is criminally low.
It's incredibly low. And there's been some legislation in the Connecticut state legislature to raise that to 30/60, which is a step in the right direction. But probably
still one night in the ER.
Yeah,
it's one night in the emergency room.
It's tough. And there are a lot of minimum policies in Connecticut, quite a few. And, you run into scenarios from time to time where your case is worth far more than that minimum insurance policy limit, and you're kind of left holding the bag. So my advice to everyone always when they're looking to protect themselves, the only thing you can control is your own insurance. So everyone should really be looking at their underinsured and uninsured motorist coverage, because that's what's going to kick in and protect you if the other driver has an expired policy or minimum insurance cases and you've, gotten into a catastrophic accident. What underinsured motorist coverage does is it kicks in. If you recover all of the liability insurance, say that full $25,000, you can then turn around to your underinsured motorist coverage and say that wasn't enough, I need more. Or if there was no insurance at all, you can say I need my coverage. A lot of people don't really think about that and they don't pay attention to, what that is. But I advise everyone to get the best coverage that they can afford on that, because that's really how you're protecting yourself, to make sure that there's something available for you if you get into a catastrophic accident. I also advise everyone to try to get conversion coverage. And again, I have to disclaimer, I'm not an insurance expert. I'm not trying to sell anyone a product here, but evaluate your conversion coverage. because how non-conversion coverage works, say I have $100,000 in underinsured motorist coverage and the other driver has 25. If I don't have conversion, my underinsured motorist coverage is entitled to an offset of anything I got from the liability carrier. So if I got 25 and my policy is 100, then there's only 75 left for me to get. But if I have conversion coverage, they are not entitled to that offset, and I can get the full 100,000 without any sort of deduction.
So it's a $50,000 swing,
so it's a very important distinction that I don't think consumers are always understanding what they're buying when they get it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't really even get that. Like, so we had a car accident in our household 6 years ago. It was at a traffic light. My husband was driving our 1-year-old minivan. All 3 kids in the car. There was a car behind him, and then a third car. They were all at a red light. Third car didn't see that the light was red and plowed into the car behind him at 45 miles an hour, which plowed into my husband's car. And we were in a situation where the middle car, obviously the driver that hit all of us was at fault. The middle car had injuries and more severe damage. By the time they got to our car, there was nothing left. Mm-hmm. And we thankfully had an underinsured policy and things like that. And so our car was fixed. Everybody was fine. But we didn't even, I've never been in a 3-car accident before. Had no idea that it was by severity, that the car in the middle had the more serious situation. They had the more serious claim. They get it first. And that was kind of, it was disappointing at the time because you don't really know it until it happens to you.
Yeah, it's true. And, with that minimum policy, that's a $50,000 per limit or per incident coverage. So if there's 5 people that were injured in the accident, if we divide it evenly, they all get 10,000.
Yeah.
But if someone's critically injured, there's no automatic payout for that. It's usually the attorneys of all the people will sort of argue about who gets what. But yeah, there's 50,000 is not a lot of coverage in a multi-vehicle accident.
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
Even the car, to get your car fixed, to whatever, it's more than that.
Well, yeah, I think that's the biggest misconception with car insurance in general. I think people think car insurance, I got to look at my car, but the real value of the coverage is not your auto body coverage, it's collision coverage. It's the liability, the bodily injury, all that other stuff, the uninsured motorist coverage, to your point. And then so most of the time, I recommend clients also get an umbrella policy on top of that, because the limits are typically low. And, if you hit someone making $100,000 and they're out for 4 or 5 years, that's $500,000 right there.
Yeah. You're in trouble.
Right. Happens pretty quick. So what do you, when you're determining, okay, we've got a case, we've got this person, we think, the damages should be like 300,000 or 400,000. Let's just throw a number out there. I don't know. That's how you guys figured out. If I'm totally wrong, tell me I'm wrong. So how do you know, okay, we're way above the limits on the damage. Are we going to fight this? How does that work?
So it's going to depend a little bit on the individual. So the insurance will cover up to its limits for the injury. Anything that goes over that, the insured is personally liable for. Practically speaking, not everybody has the means to pay a $300,000 or $400,000 overage. Mm-hmm. So we find ourselves from time to time when there's not enough insurance coverage having difficult conversations with clients to say, hey, you could fight this in court and try to get a verdict in excess of the policy. But what are your options going to look like after that in terms of collection? Are there assets to attach here? Does this person have the means to pay on a weekly basis? Is this person perhaps going to just go file bankruptcy and get out of the judgment? Things like that all have to be evaluated. So it can be a little bit tricky, and it's going to depend a little bit on how severe the injury is, what the likelihood of recovery is in the excess, and then we kind of go from there and we advise accordingly. There are certain circumstances where the insurance company can become responsible for overages if they didn't really, negotiate in good faith to settle the claim. But that's rare that it gets to that point. So there's a bunch of factors that go into that. And that's where having a lawyer you can really sit down and go through that with is going to become so important.
Do you find most tend to settle up to the limits for the most part?
Generally speaking, yes. And, that's a mix of not every there's so many accidents and there's plenty of catastrophic ones, but the reality is most of vehicle accidents in Connecticut are rear enders on the highway, and people are injured, but they're not, losing
it's not their
limbs and things like
Yeah.
that. So, usually we're able to work something out between the liability coverage and the underinsured motorist coverage. But, people do walk away disappointed, as in your case, where there's just really not enough to go around.
Now, I think we talked a lot about car accidents because that feels like the most common, right, sort of situation. But on TikTok, on Instagram, on the news, you hear a lot about these like big, I'll use the Royal Caribbean incident that happened, 2 weeks ago? Where
Was this the water slide?
The water slide busted.
Horrifying.
The guy, I'm going to be on a Royal Caribbean cruise in a couple months. We will not be on the water slide.
No.
But then all the commentary on that is like, you're going to own your own cruise ship. And you hear about, somebody slips and falls in like a big box store and you're going to sue them for millions. And it's not as simple as that. It's not and a lot of these companies and places are incredibly well protected. You're signing liability waivers. Like when you step aboard a cruise ship, you have signed a liability waiver, essentially waiving them of all responsibility to your life. And people don't really get that. Is that something that you sort of come up across sometimes, that people I'm going to own Walmart, and you're like, no, that's actually not how this works?
Yeah, from time to time we see people that have very different expectations. I was just making a joke with someone I was on the phone with the other day, where everybody knows somebody who got $5 million, and whether that's true or not, I don't know. But sometimes we hear from people that had a cousin's friend's aunt that recovered all this money in a case, and that sometimes can be difficult to explain why this scenario is different. And things like liability waivers do come into play. It can be very difficult for entertainment venues like cruise ships and theme parks and things like that have these liability waivers sort of written in. If you check the back of your ticket or the notice at the front gate, you will sometimes see these very long-winded waivers that say, by crossing this threshold, you're agreeing that, we're not responsible for any of this. And there are certain ways to overcome that depending on the facts of the incident. But it does make things very difficult. So it's not so clear just because it's a giant corporation with a lot of money and a lot of insurance that your case is going to be a layup. Those are often the cases with the strongest lawyers that know their rights and have entire legal departments dedicated to dealing with these issues. And so by design, they're prepared to fight back.
Yeah.
So do those waivers actually really do much, or are they kind of like a first wall?
They are a first wall. A lot of times we see cases like that, get resolved in pre-litigation, what we call, and sometimes they go all the way to litigation. It's a very fact-sensitive type of thing. A lot of times the waivers will, they don't waive everything, but there's usually exceptions for gross negligence, and depending on the state that you're operating in, some types of waivers are just kind of void automatically by law. So it's going to depend a little bit on where you are and what you're dealing with. So a lot of times when we bring those types of cases to court, we're going to argue that the facts are outside of the waiver because this was so egregious that they should have known, or
the water slide falling apart,
something like that. That's a tough one. I don't know how that one's going to play out. But the facts that would come up in that is, what was their duty to inspect that? Were they abiding by their own policies? If they have a policy that says, look, we were supposed to inspect this every month because it's XYZ type of glass, and they didn't do that, then they're probably going to have a liability problem on that case. So those are the kinds of things that come up in that scenario.
Yeah. And the waivers, I feel like, are a crazy life now. Is that I don't know about you guys, right? We have kids. You are signing waivers continuously as a parent. Camp waivers, the jumpy bounce place waivers, the birthday party waivers, the Chuck E. Cheese. You're signing waivers continuously. And I think we don't really think about them because they're such a normalized part of life now that you're like, oh yeah, you're not going to not go to the bouncy place because you got to sign a waiver, but you do have to sort of contemplate that. And a lot of them, I was reading one sort of in preparation for this because I was contemplating it. I was reading one of the waivers that I had signed. And it mostly talked about it if you're harmed by another patron. And I thought that was kind of interesting that they did give you space where if they messed up, you had space within this waiver. But some of the other waivers are pretty much you cross this threshold and we are not responsible for you. And again, I think that's some of the myth and misconception that lives in personal injury law, is that all you're doing in personal injury is you're suing people for big bucks because you deserve it. And it's not as simple as that.
It's not. And, I'm a personal injury attorney myself. I've got 2 young kids and we go to the, bouncy place and everything. And Same, I just take that waiver and I'm like, whatever, I don't always read it. Don't tell anybody that. But there's that part in the back of my mind that's just like, well, like we'll deal with that if it ever came up. But yeah, it's very easy to just kind of not pay attention to that, not think about it. And then something happens and you're not even really sure what you signed.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. Because I sign a lot of things.
Yeah, like that plus the terms and conditions online. Like,
oh my God.
Like, oh, I got 20 minutes to read this thing. Yeah.
No one is reading
and understand it.
But you clicked the box. You said you read and understood it.
Yep.
You did.
Yep.
I would love to kind of just know a little bit, right? Like we're talking to millennials and Gen Zers. I feel like it's kind of pivoting from the personal injury piece a little bit is like law just in general has become a super popular career path for people, right? Everybody wants to go into law. Law schools
do they
really
do they?
hard.
Really?
Yeah. Listen, when I work, you guys know I worked in higher ed part of this. It was like half of my students like, oh, I'm going to go to law school. And I'm like, oh, okay. What are you going to do with that? And like, nobody really has an answer, right? What are you going to do? Is I think, it's interesting to me, right? You've had a couple versions of your career at this point in law. What sort of brought you to personal injury?
Yeah. So, my thing with personal injury, I knew some people in the space. I worked at another injury firm a few years back and, got into it there. And I think that integrity of the body is one of the most important things in the world, right? And your body is your presence in this world, and it's your ability to do everything that you do. So when that gets violated, and I mean, in an injury sense, somebody else did something they shouldn't have been doing. They were speeding, they weren't paying attention, they were texting on their cell phone, they didn't plow their parking lot. And now all of a sudden, you can't do the things that you used to do. I think that's some of the most important work in the legal field. It affects everything. It affects your ability to participate in society. So I feel really strongly about protecting that. And, for all of our talking about how personal injury can get a bad rap, I think it's really easy to say, oh yeah, it's a little bit of back pain, whatever. But when you can't pick up your kids, you can't, do things in your garden, you can't go to the gym, that's a major disruption, and that deserves to be protected. And I believe in it so strongly that I just really love doing this work, because money's not going to fix everything, but it's, sometimes the best way we know to make things right. So got to get that money.
Well, it also acts as a check and balance on the companies, right? Because if there's a threat of being sued, you've got to do your stuff up front to protect people.
Absolutely. There's a major David and Goliath imbalance going on, and I also feel really strongly about that. And I became a lawyer because I had a really bad experience working at a company when I was about 22 years old. And I was like, never again. I'm going to go become an employment lawyer. I'm going to protect people like myself that didn't know any better. So always kind of protecting the little guy against the big guy was my motivation. And I spent many years as a consumer attorney doing the same, taking John and Jane Doe and bringing suits against places like Bank of America, Ford, major companies like that. And, just really making sure that the companies were staying in check.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So how'd you pivot to personal injury then from that?
I had spent a lot of time in consumer financial services, and it was one of those things where it was, a very, as Kelly will say, it was a very turbulent time in the industry. We were dealing with some very intense regulatory changes, and I think I just burned out a little bit, and I wanted to try something different. So I had some friends in the personal injury space. This was around like 2017. And they said, hey, come join the firm, like give it a try. And I absolutely loved it. It was great. And so I got hooked, and then the pandemic happened. There was a lot of changes for law firms. The court systems were really paralyzed for a long time. And the mortgage industry was booming. So I went back and I spent a little time there. But, getting back and really fighting for the little guy was calling me. So when the opportunity came up to join Goth, I knew it was going to be a great fit for me.
I love that. So again, millennials like to go to law school. Gen Z likes to go to law school. So you didn't set out to be a lawyer then? Like that wasn't the initial...
It wasn't. I was an English major at a small liberal arts school from Massachusetts. And I double majored. So my other major was Spanish. And
close to law.
I got out in 2007, and everyone who was a millennial knew what was going on in the market at that time. And there was just nothing.
Yeah.
So I worked as a librarian in a public library in Southbridge, Massachusetts for a while, making about probably $25,000 a year and figuring out how the hell was I going to pay back my student loans. And, I did a little bit in like consulting and things like that. And, I got that old adage of, hey, you're really great at arguing. You should go be a lawyer. And I was like, I think I will go be a lawyer. And that's really what brought me to the law.
Wow, that's a cool.
Yeah.
That's a cool. And we've talked a little bit, I think, in other episodes about like the pivot that, because Hailey knows this about me. Maybe everybody doesn't. Is like my bachelor's degree is in fine arts, and here I am in the mortgage industry. Right? Is like you kind of never know where things are going to take you. And I think following your interests and following your passions and knowing that you're great at arguing, all can like bring you to a lucrative career where you do well and you enjoy the work that you do.
Yeah. And I think, there's so much focus. Like, I like to take note of how my kid's childhood is so much different than my own. And I think like the central question that I remember from being a kid was, what do you want to be when you grow up? Right? People don't ask my kids that, really, not in the way that I remember. Like, everyone had an answer. And if you were like a Lisa Frank kid in 5th grade,
You wanted to go to art school or
marine biologist,
biology?
right? Everyone wanted to be a marine biologist. I don't think my kids even know what a marine biologist is. They've never even heard that word.
Yeah.
But I remember having these discussions about, what I wanted to be. And I think, for our demographic, it's really ingrained in us, that importance of work and career pathing and everything like that. And it has to be linear. And I think one of the great blessings of my career is that I've had a lot of pivots. And it's made me, really be able to dig deep for a lot of different types of resources, because I've seen, so many different areas of the law and so many different kinds of people and how companies think and all of these things. So it's never too late for a pivot. And I think, the pivots are actually what really can make a very interesting candidate and a really effective advocate, particularly in the legal space.
Maybe I'm going to go to law school, Derek.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm going to leave mortgage. No, I'm not.
You've got time.
No, yeah, I've got all the time in the world. No, that will not be happening. But no, I sort of like that thought. And I would agree with you. Like, nobody asks my kids that anymore. And I sometimes ask my kids, and they don't even really have an answer at this point. Where like, yeah, when we were a kid, like, I'm going to be a marine biologist. I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to be a firefighter. Like, you had the answer. And I ask my kids, and like, nobody really knows. And I don't know if that's like a good thing. It's they don't feel as like locked into things, or that maybe they watch too much TV. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I asked mine last week because I was just thinking about this, and they both looked at me like I had 5 heads, and they were like, I don't know. And I was like, no, but like, what do you like to do? And they were like, I don't know.
Well,
I don't know if it's
my
just
7-year-old's
age.
going to be a landscaper because they have big trucks with 6 wheels. So
Oh, I like it.
All right.
So there you go.
I'm
That's a
here
good
for
one.
that. I'm here for that. One of my kids wants to work for dad. That's really like, I'm going to work in construction. I'm like, cool, do that. But yeah, like my two daughters are one wants to be a dog walker. I'm here for that. She loves dogs. And then the other one wants to be a model, which is, very aspirational.
That's
we
ambitious.
all love that. Yeah. Yeah. She's an ambitious kid.
I think I've got one that probably wants to play video games professionally,
Oh,
but
yeah.
she doesn't know that's an option yet.
Oh.
But that's the answer I'm anticipating I'll get once she figures out
Listen,
that's a
you
thing.
can major
Yeah.
in like that now in college.
It's
like
true.
And there's a sports, you get like college D1 video game playing.
Yeah, sports gaming. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
See?
Justin's not
Wow.
over there.
Yeah, the producer is like, yes, I've heard. Justin has been on the show before. The producer's a Gen Zer,
He's
so
a youth. Yeah.
yeah, he's a
Oh,
youth.
well.
Yeah, he's a youth.
Yeah, youth. You young
What was
bucks.
the joke that you made? There was
A Ron Burgundy one.
He made a
and
Ron Burgundy joke, and
didn't get it.
Justin didn't know the Ron Burgundy joke.
Oh, that hurts my heart.
Right.
My millennial heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got to
I
know. You got to know. So, do you have any sort of last minute advice for people that, like, again, you get bit by a dog, you get rear-ended, you fall in the grocery store? Like, first step is document.
Yep. Take the dog with you.
Yeah.
It's never overkill. And I think, again, and not to harp on it, but with some of the stigmas around personal injuries, some people have like an idea of like, well, personal injury is just for, fakers or people that are, desperate or anything like that. And then it happens to them and they're completely paralyzed. And they're like, I never saw myself in this scenario. My advice to people is it's never a bad idea to protect yourself. It's not too much to ask questions. It's not too much to ask that the police come. It's not too much to go to the doctor and get your spine checked out to make sure you don't have a spinal fracture. And I think people have been sort of conditioned to believe that advocating for themselves in those types of scenarios is somehow a bad thing. Get the information from the dog owner about their insurance. Ask the questions at the scene. Make sure you're getting the information and you're doing what you need to do to protect yourself, because this is a really important thing and it can have long-lasting consequences on your life. So, make sure you're doing what you need to do. And if the scenario winds up being different, you can always say, you know what, I've decided not to pursue this. But at least if you've preserved everything you need to preserve at the beginning, you're going to have options down the line.
I like it.
Yeah, that's great. I think you got to be your own advocate. You've got to not, feel like you're a victim, and take control of your situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and don't go in the water slide on the Royal Caribbean
Don't
cruise.
do that.
Because it will implode.
Unless you're trying to make it big bucks, right?
Right, big time. No, you signed a billion liability waivers, and cruise ships are not usually flagged. I went in like a deep marine law dive.
Yeah.
Again, we've talked about it in the show.
International waters, is that the problem?
The ADHD rabbit holing that I like to do, where I like watch one video on something. I am now an expert on marine law.
Well, I will call you and I have a question, but that's my personal nightmare. I already get a little claustrophobic in those like water slide tubes. I don't like to do them. So when I was watching the video and I was like, this is already terrible as I'm watching these people come down the slide and then it busts open. I'm like,
yeah.
okay, this is my personal hell.
Like I'm a thick girl. I don't want to be in that tube anyway. Like that is like, I'm going to get stuck and everything is over. But like, then you're like such a thick girl. You bust through. It was a guy, but like you bust through, like that hurts bodily. That hurts your self-esteem. That hurts a lot of things.
That's going to require some therapy.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And now you're being airlifted off of a cruise ship, like to, an island for, I don't want anything to do with
Not for
that.
me.
Not for me. Thank you. Agreed.
Yeah, I think that's it, right?
I think that's it. Hailey.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. This was so much fun.
We will put your contact information in the show notes. So if anybody wants to get in touch with Hailey, we will have all of her information.
Well, do you want to just shout out quickly how do we get a hold of you?
Yeah, so you can contact me at the firm anytime. I'm super active on LinkedIn as well. So DM me, check out my profile. I talk a lot about personal injury and the law and working out. So I'm always up there. You can find me there. And hopefully I'll meet some of the audience.
Yeah. And wait, what is the TikTok handle for the dog?
Sir Elton Dog. He is a corgi and he's got real big ears. He's super cute. So find him on TikTok.
Sir Elton. I've been watching the videos and they're pretty
Sir Elton.
spectacular.
Nice.
Appreciate it. Awesome. Thank you. And thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.